Vera Lynn died earlier this year at the age of 103. She was Dame Vera Lynn. Dame is the feminine equivalent of a knight. And the word lady is perhaps not popular these days, but I'd like to think of her as a lady. I met Vera Lynn several decades ago. I was a reporter at a radio station in Ottawa, and she was on a promotional tour of Canada sponsored by the British government. I don't remember what the occasion was, but I had the assignment one day to go to the British High Commission and interview Vera Lynn. I was taken into a small room, set up my tape recorder and my microphone, and before I sat down, in walked this lady with a huge smile. Now, it's a cliche to say that a smile can light up a room, and it was a pretty small room, but she certainly lit it up. And I'm told by generations before me who heard her on the radio that she could light up a room through a radio speaker as well. We had our interview, which was more of a chat. It was sort of like having tea without the tea and the biscuits. And we talked about her career, and we talked about her job during the war as a military weapon, without wearing a uniform and without carrying anything dangerous. She was a weapon of propaganda, but she was also a morale booster. She was an inspiration to people under siege and people at home, and provided hope. Her message was, it's tough now, it's going to get better, there will be bluebirds singing, and we'll meet again. It's kind of a message we could use today, although the circumstances aren't quite as dire as they were then. My dad, who was a bomber pilot in World War II, once told me that flying home from their missions in Europe when they were dodging anti-aircraft fire and enemy fighters, they would get close to being back in England. And when they were close enough to tune into the BBC broadcast on their aircraft radio, and they heard Vera Lynn, and he says they knew they were home and they were safe. And when she died this year, I remembered. I said, you know, I've met that lady, and I'm really glad I did, because I'm her fan too. Thank you.
I was so pleased that David had that memory to share of actually meeting somebody that most of us will only have ever heard of, and perhaps heard her singing. This book was passed along to me last year. It's called Vera Lynn, Keep Singing Through, Keep Smiling Through at least, and it's written by Vera and her daughter. I thought music was a wonderful thing for us to look at today as a spiritual gift that resourced generations before us and resources us today. Things are asked of every generation. That's certainly what Remembrance Day reminds us of. Generations have told the story, and we are learning more about those stories from different angles every year, of what they willingly gave up for the cause they believed in. For some hundreds of thousands, some of whose names appear on our walls here at First Met, what they gave up was their very lives. But there were many other sacrifices, and one of them was connection. And Vera Lynn represented, as David's story tells, connection, coming home. And she traveled broadly to as far away as Burma making that connection, bringing to them those injured men, the men still fighting, who felt forgotten after VE Day and the big news of D-Day. She visited and she sang. We can't sing. It's what our generation right now this year, we have given up. We have willingly stopped singing. It is in part one of our sacrifices for the place we love, for the people we share this time with. And so it's a faint analogy because, as David said, very different, harder times then. They didn't have to give up singing. We do. We have technology, though, that would be beyond their dreams, that wherever we are practically at any time, we can hear music. And in that gift of music, we are lifted. In this little book, Vera says some things. And this is in the language of her daughter. And that she's talking about that trip to Burma. This strikes at the very heart of why my mother became so successful during the war. But for me, it also shows why the trip was so exhausting for her. I'll just interrupt the daughter here to say, until Vera left on that trip to Burma, which meant landing about 12 different places, including India and across the North Africa, she had never been on a plane before. That's that generation. Vera gave all the men she sang for an emotional outlet. For the soldiers and airmen in Burma who felt so isolated and far away from home, the emotions were amplified and she became their connection with home. My mother may not agree, but I feel that by serving as this emotional connection, by representing their hopes and dreams, by linking the men to their wives, families, and sweethearts, she became emotionally exhausted. They invested so much in her, and she tried to give everything she could back to them. There was something heroically selfless about her complete openness and willingness to engage emotionally with the soldiers in this way. I would commend this little book, which is filled with quotes from letters from soldiers who survived and the families that didn't, of soldiers who didn't. In the introduction, her daughter, whose name is Virginia Lewis Jones, says that it was only something like a war that could have taken Vera out there all the way to Burma, to a place that was so different. Vera says it was different from everything she'd ever known. Something like a war asks us to turn to our deepest resources. The Sacred Spirit has given us, as the ancient Ecclesiasticus reading reminded us, one of the gifts of God has been music. Through the long ages, even if the author wasn't known, even if the composer isn't known, even if it's just a song hummed underneath the mask in the 21st century context. Something like a war. We're living, for many people, in something that feels like a war today. And on this Remembrance Day, we are given one more gift by those men and women, some of them really merely children, who fought in all the wars. We are being given the reminder of the power of music to lift us, to support us, and to connect us, mind and body, to God and to other things that matter to us beyond our faith, our home, our families, our hopes for the future. Music, then, whether it has words or it is, as St. Paul suggests in Colossians, just that connection too deep for words. Music allows us to have conversations with Spirit, with God, without worrying about what are we saying, if it The word captures it. A conversation. And today, one of our conversations that music helps us is to express our gratitude one more time to the men and women who gave their lives that we remember on Remembrance Day. Our generations still wear the poppy that Flanders Fields refers to now over 100 years ago. We are still singing that song. And like Vera Lynn and thousands others, we are given the chance to have that conversation about what has mattered, what feeds us with hope. And for resilience, we are encouraged to pour our hearts out to God and to allow God to refill our empty cup when we feel discouraged, overwhelmed, or lost. It wasn't a glib or easy message, which is why I read the story, that little paragraph that Virginia included about her mother's exhaustion. We shouldn't be sentimental or nostalgic about the cost of war, even for someone like Vera Lynn, who turned so many hearts during it. But today's conversation, involving our gratitude to God for the gift of music, is one more chance when we can look at the generations who have fought, right up until today, the generations who in many ways, in different ways than our grandparents and our fathers, our mothers and our aunts and uncles fought, new ways of turning to us to say, this is what I do for you. And so we sing a song of gratitude. We lift a voice of gratitude to God for courage, for valor, for truth. We lift a voice of gratitude for every sacrifice made and every truth discovered. We continue to wear the poppy. We continue to have the minute of silence long after they are gone, that generation that fought those early battles. And we will continue to do so in a song of gratitude, remembrance, and thanksgiving. May it be so for us. Amen.